240,000. That's the number of temporary foreign workers the Canadian government allowed Canadian employers to bring into the country last year. It's the most ever, on record, and almost double the number that they approved just 2 years ago. But here's another number, 1.4 million. That's about how many Canadians are without a job and looking right now. That's got some economists arguing that this program, meant to be an extraordinary measure to be used when a qualified Canadian isn't able to fill a job vacancy, that it's evolved into something else entirely.
It's really moved a long way past its intention as a program.
In the approval rate, it has gone from about 70% to now it is about 97%.
This low-wage stream has grown absolutely out of control.
And the concern is that shift is having very real, very serious consequences for the country and on younger Canadians looking for work. Let me explain. Canada's Foreign Worker Program was originally designed to fill positions mostly in agriculture. You can think of a local farm that needs seasonal workers to help with its harvest each year. Other industries could use foreign workers too, but there was a cap, no more than 10% of your workforce. But then
we're short employees.
Reports of businesses struggling to rehire.
Restaurants, fast food, and retail in particular were struggling. They had open jobs that they couldn't fill, to the point where they didn't even have enough people to stay open. What they needed, they said, was to be able to bring people into work from overseas, open the floodgates.
There is just quite simply a tremendous amount of lobbying pressure from businesses in Canada. And so the government, at a time when there were really, job vacancies were very high, they had hit record levels, they responded to that threat by essentially opening up the system.
So the system, as it was, capped foreign workers at 10% of a business's workforce. But a couple of years ago, the government bumped that up to 20% across the board, and all the way up to 30% for more than half a dozen industries. And look what happened. This chart from the Globe and Mail shows how many workers Canadian employers were allowed to bring into the country each year to fill the category of low-wage jobs. So that's the blue line that you see here. Entry-level positions in retail, construction, manufacturing, transportation. But what's behind this big jump that you see over the past 2 years is the food service industry. Hiring of foreign workers in that category is up close to 5,000% since 2018. According to Bloomberg, in Ontario, Tim Hortons took on 58 temporary foreign workers in 2019, but last year, it was over 700.
This has been a big transformative change. This is tens of thousands of extra temporary foreign workers, particularly at coffee shops and convenience stores, ice cream places, and that kind of workplace.
Now, there are still rules in place to make sure businesses aren't just filling as many positions as possible with cheap labor. It is supposed to be a last resort, right? So, for example, they have to post the job locally first and make the case that the pay they're offering for the job is fair.
I mean, these are what we call generically labor market tests. They're essentially just a way for the government to ensure that these are genuine labor market needs that can't be satisfied locally with local labor.
And I think this is an attempt to sort of protect Canadian workers. The problem is, in practice, it doesn't work that well.
Because it's very hard to determine whether or not that's the case, whether there really aren't local sources of labor supplies.
And that's a really important point, something that's hard to verify with an application. So, for example, if a business says it had no qualified local applicants for a job, a bureaucrat looking at their application to hire foreign workers has to determine, well, what does that mean? How do I tell if someone was or wasn't qualified, especially when you're posting a job with no formal education or technical requirements?
It isn't that there's, these hard rules that must be satisfied. It is quite simply a very sort of subjective, you have to document that you have made efforts.
The experts we spoke to say it's gotten to the point where the requirements are so nebulous and there are so many applications coming in, they're just being rubber stamped.
When the probability your application is accepted with a 97% success rate, there's really not much of a test anymore.
And if you're thinking, well, maybe 97% of applications are perfectly legitimate uses of the program, well, just look at what happens when the government does go back later to audit those companies. This is a rolling list of businesses that have received fines over the past few years for breaking the rules. And take this audit of Dynasty Produce in Cobourg, Ontario, just as an example. The company was fined $25,000 last month because the job details it wrote on the application didn't match what the job actually was. The government handed out more than $2 million in fines, just like this past year. And here's the thing. The government not only opened the floodgates in 2022, it removed the guardrails as well. Here's what I mean. There used to be a rule that applications in the food and retail sectors would be automatically rejected if the local unemployment rate was 6% or higher. So the thinking being that if lots of locals were looking for work, there should be no reason to depend on cheap foreign labor. But in 2022, the government got rid of that rule. And take a look at the City of Toronto's unemployment rate. For most of the past 2 years, it's been above 6%. And by now, almost every major Canadian city has reached 6%, some even higher than that.
If the unemployment rate is that high, it seems like there are a lot of people who could be filling these job vacancies.
One of the big concerns for economists right now is the impact all of this is having on young people.
All of these jobs are important jobs, but they're also jobs that, especially in the fast food sector, this is often, young Canadians' first jobs.
Now again, this program is supposed to be a last resort to fill jobs when there aren't any Canadian workers available. But let's look again at Toronto. There are about 120,000 people between 15 and 24 looking for work. That's an increase of 50% in just 2 years.
The CNE says they received 37,000 applications this year, the most in the X's history.
The competition was a lot because they wouldn't even read my emails, they wouldn't even call back.
On that question of callbacks, the economists we spoke to say some companies actually prefer to hire temporary foreign workers over young Canadians because they're generally more mature, they have more life experience, and in many cases, they're much less likely to complain about low pay or poor working conditions.
I mean, the research I've done shows that, there's reasons to think that employers will pitch a low wage when they advertise. If the search fails, hope that the government gives them permission to hire a temporary foreign worker.
There are ways of, advertising on sites that aren't used as much, perhaps putting in some exotic type requirements and then saying, well, yes, we had 37 domestic applicants, but none of them met our needs. So we have to go overseas.
So it's not difficult if you really have a preference for the foreign candidate over the Canadian candidate to say that the Canadian candidate wasn't somehow suitable. And I think that's ultimately what the problem is with these tests.
And take a look at this. Between the time these new rules were introduced in 2022 and now, the national youth unemployment rate has spiked from around 9% to over 14%. And for young immigrants who've landed in Canada in the past 5 years, it's even worse, around 23%.
A fiercely competitive job market means young people across Vancouver are struggling to score work.
There's no question that this is negatively impacting the employment prospects for younger people.
But there's also another side to this coin, because it's also probably true that some young people just aren't applying to these service sector jobs because they don't think the pay is high enough. And maybe the pay isn't high enough because employers have access to people who think the pay is just fine.
We should keep in mind that, what they're trying to do is bring in temporary foreign workers at the current wage rather than raising their wages and trying to attract more domestic labor. So even when the program is working as designed, it's suppressing wage growth for the folks who are already in Canada.
Think of it this way. If I own a food truck in Ontario and I'm posting a job because I need someone to help me flip burgers, I'm going to post it at minimum wage. In Ontario, that's $16.55 an hour. A few days pass and I'm not getting any takers. So I say, okay, maybe I need to make the job a little bit more attractive. We're not going to pay minimum wage. Instead, we're going to pay $18 an hour. And boom, suddenly, a lot more people are interested. But what happens if I don't have to do that? And if instead I can just apply to hire someone temporarily from another country where $16.55 an hour suits them just fine?
Before we had temporary foreign worker programs, the process would be that you had to pay the competitive wage, and the competitive wage is where supply equals demand. The temporary foreign worker program, in a sense, hijacks that process.
And if wages are stagnating instead of rising, that adds up over time. Here's just how little wages in this category have grown since 2010. End to end, this is an increase of 50 cents, maybe a little bit more. And this is adjusted for inflation, but still. Now, is this solely because of the temporary foreign worker program? No. But the economists we spoke to say it is very likely contributing.
If there are jobs in the economy that Canadians won't do, maybe we should start asking ourselves why Canadians won't do those jobs. Maybe we should be asking ourselves, well, maybe the problem is those jobs just aren't attractive enough, and that needs to change.
For the most part, the businesses that rely on temporary foreign workers see all of this from a very different perspective. They say taking away these workers would mean they'd have to bump up prices, lay off staff, or even shut down altogether.
Canada, like many other countries, has become addicted to temporary foreign workers.
There may be some firms that could not survive at, if they have to raise their wage from $17 to $18 or to $19. But we have to ask ourselves, what do we want more? Do we want a handful of marginally profitable businesses to survive? Or do we want to see wages go up for hundreds of thousands of young Canadians? In my mind, that's an easy trade-off.
Some economists even go so far as to say this program has taken too much pressure off Canadian businesses, because when they know that they can hire a whole bunch of ultra low wage workers, there's much less incentive to make large scale investments, develop new processes, or adopt new technologies to become more efficient. And we know Canadian businesses are falling behind in all of those areas.
We have a labor productivity problem in this country. The way we increase labor productivity is not by working harder. It's by working smarter. It's by giving workers the tools, the equipment, the machinery, the technology that allows them to produce more every hour that they work. That's what we need.
Now, there is a broader question worth asking about who else the temporary foreign worker program potentially hurts, including temporary foreign workers themselves. But the federal government has made some small tweaks to the program over the past few weeks, and they've promised there's more to come. Now, it's not clear whether they'll roll back all of the changes they made in 2022 or try to adjust the application process. But some of the economists we spoke to said if it were up to them, it wouldn't be a question of what to change. They'd cut this low-wage stream we've been talking about entirely.